Hey everyone, got a kind of different guest this week into the podcast. We've got Clare Haynes, who I met through Lisa Johnson's One to Many course in our accountability pod. We had a really interesting discussion in one of our recent pods where the menopause was brought up, and I shared my very little knowledge of that. And Claire, you had some amazing insights in a really brief amount of time, which kind of led me to go, oh, do you know what? It'd be really good to explore this a little bit more. I'd like to be less ignorant on the matter. I also have seen things happen in the workplace around this, which in a negative way had a negative impact. So welcome. I'm excited, but also nervous because this is something I don't know a lot about. And also aware that it's quite, I don't know whether the word strange is okay to use from my point of view, because I don't know a lot about it. It's not something that's I'm going to experience myself, apart from with I've got three daughters, I've got a partner, like being a part of it and seeing it happen. But I think my wider remit is just to say that welcome. I want to learn more about it because we're all growing businesses. Who knows where that's going to be in 5 years' time? I want to make sure that whatever is set up is ready for everybody to succeed and progress. So welcome. You consider yourself the conversation queen at the moment, in your words. So do you consider yourself different things at different points, or does it change over time, Claire?
I think I've just realised after 20 years of coaching, facilitating and doing public speaking that that is central to everything I do. It's workplace psychology.
Okay.
And I've just realised that actually that's the baseline. That is what I end up talking about all the time, and all the principles come back to that about helping people with difficult conversations. And I work best with women. So primarily because there's a way that they have a certain need to position their conversations.
You said before, just before we press record, that you support women have difficult conversations, and I was like, well, I think you're going to help me today have a difficult conversation. Why is like talking about the menopause difficult for men? What do you think is the underlying reason for that?
I'm not sure. I'm not an expert, but I will give you an example that really made me chuckle. So I met my partner when I was in perimenopause already. And he's a really good listener. And he had no choice, because part of the menopause is you kind of, it's quite easy to get a bit more feisty. And so it's kind of like, look, this is me, and you get to a certain age. I was in my late 40s, like, look, this is me, take it or leave it. I haven't got time for any rubbish in a relationship. I've got kids, I've got a business, I'm a single parent, blah, blah, blah. I run 2 businesses, whatever. And he's been great at listening. But what happened was he went to the pub with his mates and they were watching rugby or whatever. And they're all chatting about how are you, how your wives, all this kind of stuff. And one of the lads was talking about how his wife was really starting to suffer mentally. And my other half, he started saying, well, it could be this or this about the menopause, or, that you could consider this, maybe she needs help. And he got launched, and they turned and go, oh my God, you're turning into a raving feminist. And I was like, well, I'd like all the men I know to be feminists, to be honest, because it benefits the whole of society. But it was just funny that was because he was understanding about menopause, that was considered now a raving feminist.
Wow. Okay, so we're being dragged down by our mates, aren't we? Basically, peer pressure.
But I think it underlines the ignorance, and and that's for men and women. So my mum is a retired, really experienced nurse, and the stuff I can tell her about the menopause, she had no idea about.
Oh, right. Okay. So is this like the thing
it's
that
everybody?
It's like moving all of society towards better understanding. And I suppose with what I witnessed and what I've seen in industry, and I'll be really clear, like I've pretty much been a civil servant most of my life, apart from a small window of time where I didn't see a lot because I wasn't there long enough. But I've seen how people exit and come back again out of teaching, like whether they're starting a family or even to the point where perhaps they do need like just a time off to adjust. And I'm not sure whether that's down to things like being perimenopausal or just going through the menopause itself. But a big shift has been around having things like menopause policies in place, so there is a better understanding. Is that one enough? Because I've seen those policies, I still don't really understand, one, how it's supportive, or how I could support someone, or even how a larger organization could support an individual going through or someone who's perimenopausal or menopausal. So what the shift towards perhaps like reducing the ignorance is a bit more knowledge, but then what's missing? What is there something missing? Are we still on the right path? How can we accelerate it?
I think what's missing, I think it's really similar to things like understanding women have periods, women have babies, women carry the mental load,
Mm,
women still have, the majority of childcare responsibilities. What happens when, mum often ends up being, when parents split up, mum often ends up being the major carer. I think it's enveloped within general stuff that affect women that have an impact on society. And we know that we need women to work. We know that as
yeah.
an economy and all the other things. And so, yeah, particularly in things like nursing or the teaching profession, where the majority of the employees are women.
Mm,
I think I think it is about education, but we also have to understand that even doctors so far do not have compulsory menopausal education. So if we think we're not with it, then doctors aren't.
wow.
It is that backwards.
Mm,
And people like Davina McCall and Louise Newsom, Dr. Louise Newsom, are making phenomenal strides. That's how I found out about it.
mm,
And I think you can have policies, and I think the fact that someone even wants to make a policy, because there are plenty corporate and private in companies that won't have one. People that don't, if you think people don't have a permanent HR function, if they have a menopause policy, then brilliant. I can name loads that don't.
mm.
And so it is, I think any awareness is great awareness. And I'm really glad, like you, I'm really glad, I've got a daughter. I'm really glad by the time our daughters hit these stages in life that it will be so much more understood, a bit like kind of part-time working is understood now, or, better understood.
it I was quite sure. I did a little bit of research before, again, because I didn't want to come in with nothing at all. Um, 1 in 6 actually leave professions altogether just because of lack of support. And that's not because they're not passionate about it, or that it's not the thing that they were born to do. It's just because actually is it fair to call it a small window of time? Because it's not really, is it? Like, it goes on for a number of years, isn't it? Perimenopause or into menopause. So it's quite a significant amount of time. But what kind of support? Let's say I'm a small business. We can talk about corporates. I'm a small business and I've got some part-time staff, and someone comes to me and says, I don't know whether they'd actually say it. Well, hopefully they would go, I'm perimenopausal. This is what's happening. What could I put in place that could provide the support that they would need to continue, or at least feel as though that they didn't need to leave? Like, what kind of work balance or support within work could I offer?
I think, and I'm treading carefully. I don't want to offend somebody. I think it's the same as if someone has ADHD, someone has dyslexia, someone has a physical condition,
Yeah,
someone has, something that happens when they spend too much time on screens.
yeah.
Whatever it is, it's one of those where if you are opening up a conversation to say, right, what considerations do you need for you to be able to perform the best in this role? What do I need to know about you, whether it's medical, health wise, or other? It's being open to it,
Mm,
because the problems within menopause is that everyone's symptoms and the effects on everyone are so different
mm,
that even when doctors want to do hormone tests, they're never really necessarily that accurate, because they didn't know the baseline before they started, because everyone's different. So if my
sure.
baseline estrogen, progesterone, whatever, was different to someone else's, they can't compare the two when we're in the middle of it. So I think but also there's that thing of being open to someone else's ignorance. That person may not have sought support. I was perimenopausal long before I even realised I was
Mm,
perimenopausal. And so like a lot of women, I have not had any hot flush stuff unless I've had a few too many sherries. I haven't, I haven't had hot
Yeah.
flushes.
Okay.
So that's often what used to be the trigger of people had an idea, other than their periods messing around. But that happens later on anyway, before it's an indication, but that doesn't necessarily get doctors to react to anything.
So
So
is it about
it's,
looking again at that, the individual, right? The individual comes and
yeah.
says, what about if it was the other way around? Like perhaps, like you say, like you didn't even know. So if somebody else had noticed something, I went to Atomicon a few weeks ago, and Davina McCall was the keynote, and she was talking about how it had changed the way that she was working, because there was times when she was on set, she had everything ready to go, and then suddenly block. She was like, oh, I don't know what to do. And she said she was lucky that there was people around us, just like, well, you're just going to do this or do this. And then eventually they figured out what it was, and they came up with this kind of like way of supporting her, because she wasn't any less brilliant than what she was before. It was just these little things were getting in the way of her performing in the actual moment. So things like for her was, she said the brain fog was really strong. And so things were, the memory just was not the same. And so they came up with a way of like having prompts in the background, so the shit was like, oh right, and now this, oh right, and now that. So I mean, look, that's particularly okay in a set, because you can have someone behind a camera or up the top maybe queuing you in. But in a job like, and I, because the word that comes to mind is being flexible. So if
Yeah.
someone comes in and they're having that day or a couple of days or that week where it's like, do you know what, I'm not functioning because it's this and this. When we're in jobs like teaching or a nursing profession, there's no flexibility, is there? Like you go, well, you've got to go and perform your duty. Um, what do we do in those? What could we do in those instances? Like I have a couple of ideas, but I'd be interested to know, like you've got some experience of your mum being a nurse. Um, I'd be interested to know your opinion.
I think so. For example, for me, I go into workplaces and train people,
Mm,
or I can be speaking at a conference. And one, I think it's helping people. So, I'll have memory lapses, and even if I've got prompts, sometimes you just can't remember the vocabulary. So
mm,
we all have that, where, and I remember, for example, my brother saying to me, "Oh yeah, he's 3 years older than me," but going, "Yeah, yeah, but we all have memory lapses." And his wife had actually had premature menopause, and she'd been through it, and he'd been through it with her, supporting
mm,
her, and he still didn't believe that I had memory lapses. And I was like, "No, no, actually, I'm not that great at maths. I was really quite good at English, so my vocabulary is not bad." And I think it's that understanding, and it's also bringing people together. So if um, if people can have conversations about how can our work practices be better,
mm.
and also I think it's about vulnerability, because the one thing that we run away the most, I see every day, is we run away from shame, because we've never been taught how to deal with that. And so the opposite of that is obviously vulnerability. So anything that can encourage people that this is a safe environment, we want to help you perform as much as we can. And also because a lot of the people you're going to work with are women. We've even had politicians that have almost denounced, female politicians who are not perimenopausal or menopausal, who have pretty much denounced menopause as an illness, I think it was.
Mm.
And you're still thinking, oh wow. So I think, yeah, conversations where it's open and people can talk and people can explain, even if they, like you say, they may not recognize it, but just having those open conversations about people that are going into schools working may not be perimenopause or menopausal, but they still might need to you know benefit. They would benefit from knowing more about it because they might have colleagues who are.
Yeah,
So
that's I think that's a really good point. Like from a male perspective, like we don't get told this stuff, and I think it's better now. Like even like you're talking about like periods and the cycle, the menstrual cycle, and how that can change how somebody performs over the course of like the 4 weeks. But like and that's better. Like it's not like it was back 40 years ago where you get the boys in one room and the girls in the other, and the boys don't even hear about periods at all. That's slightly better. But even at that level would be is interesting to know, and also key to know when you're leading something. Now, whether I know we're going to, I'll talk about schools in general. There's a big disparity in schools between the fact that probably eight. This is me making up numbers, but it will be close. 80% of the workforce probably female, but yet probably 80% of the leaders are male. Right, so it comes down to that kind of like split and divide. They need to know, right? Because otherwise they set up policies and it's not going to be helpful. And in fact, that's probably true. If you looked at, I mean, I know teachers are leaving in droves anyway, but if you looked at the aggregate data of women of a certain age leaving, I bet that shouts volumes in terms of the support around like 45 to sort of 55, which I think is something else. Well, it could be something else. It'll be related to, because I don't think it's just over one thing. But one of the reasons which sparked the interest in us having this conversation was that this whole kind of moving towards like empowerment, like where you said you used the word feisty earlier on. Like there's like, actually, I'm going to go and take, I'll say what's mine, but I'm also going to reach my full potential. It's just I've got more to give here. I'm not just somebody who's serving as a nurse or being a teacher or being a mum. There's more here. So does that come into play here as well? And then and then I'm going to mention my friend who left teaching, where she was amazing. She was a leader. She was passionate, and just one of the most inspiring teachers. And she's similar to me. So let's say she's late 30s. I don't think she's 40 yet. She's left and she's now running a photography business. And I'm really proud, because I think people should go and do these things, that they live their dream lives. But we've lost a really inspirational teacher, and she's pursuing a dream. What could we be doing that would help serve our women better, maybe even like young girls better coming out of school, so they do pursue things that are not just about being a mum, being a servant somewhere? Is there what else could we be adding in? Is this an educational thing? Is it an educational thing at primary, at secondary, or is it something much, much deeper than that?
I think it's deeply societal, and I think the difference is around the menopause, you suddenly realise it. So I grew up. I'm naturally pretty strong-minded, as you can
Mm,
tell. I was fiercely independent. I was probably a pain in the backside for my parents. I, I didn't see that I couldn't do something because I wasn't aware of sexism. I
mm,
didn't realise. I mean, I was at an all-girls school when I was in my teens, and then I went to a mixed school, and I saw some things happening, kind of like, oh, okay, so boys just talk over girls in class. So I'd shut them up because I was used to kind of going, she's smarter than you, be quiet, that kind of thing. And but I think an extension of that is that you have the mental. The main problem you have is that women are positioned to be people pleasers and carers first. And that's where we are. If we're nice and we're kind and we're generous and we're supportive, that's where our value is perceived as in society, as opposed to men's value is seen elsewhere, economically, or providing whatever it is. But because as is external to us, as is not about how we feel about ourselves, it's about how we make other people feel.
mm.
We could go on about that forever, but
Yeah.
what happens in menopause is suddenly you realize it all because your hormones are dropping. What happens is estrogen drops. When estrogen is the thing that makes us tolerant. So estrogen makes us really tolerant to be able to cope with sleepless nights, children running in different directions, and managing a house, and putting other people first, and managing different generations. Which is why, it might be a reason why women are good in caring professions, other than it being, prescribed. And in menopause, what makes you feisty is that drops, your tolerance is lower. So I'll give you an example. I set up the WhatsApp group in my street during COVID. I hit COVID, homeschooling, and perimenopause right at the same time. It was a cocktail of a disaster. And I set up this WhatsApp group to help everybody, anyone that was isolated in our street. And then I became the worst person in the world because I hated all of them. And I couldn't understand why. They wanted to have like street parties or meet in the street and be really friendly. And my tolerance was utterly zero.
Mm.
And I count myself as being in a room of the average 10 people or whatever, I count myself to be one of the most resilient in there, if not the most. I'm the person that people can come to, and I handle dramas really well. I handled COVID really badly. And homeschooling, I mean, on the face of it, I was handling it really well, but I didn't understand why. And because my tolerance for everything was dropping. And, but what I felt was just uncompassionate, mean, spiteful, lacking resilience. And so, and I don't know if you know, but the suicide rate of women is highest in their menopausal era.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And yeah, so this is that's what I heard. I think that's right. And so it's because women's confidence dips massively. It's confusing. I think the biggest thing that I can tell you about it is a complete identity shift. Not,
Mm.
I know there are some people that go, no, I sailed through it. It's a complete identity shift because you're reevaluating, you know, what can I do, because you don't necessarily have the energy anymore. Your tolerance might be lower. You're
Mm.
not sure where you fit in anymore. You might or might not have the resilience. And in some ways, so I've had to, and I think this is where the feisty bit comes from, and the conversation we had in the pod, you know, I wasn't the only one. The
No.
feistiness comes from, I'm going to have to set some more boundaries. So there are things, for example, you know, my parents aren't together, so I've got two sets of parents to see. There are three sets of grandparents my children have, you know,
Mm.
and normally I'm accommodating all of them. You know, we must see everybody. And now I'm more ruthless about it, going, I can't do this for the kids and this for business and keep a house and run another business and do this and see them all every 2 weeks. Because literally what happens is I get sleep deprived. I can't do all of this. And, you know, not having sleep is even worse in menopause if you've been manipulating your sleep like I have to run two business for years, which is
Mm.
not advisable by anybody's standards. Look, look at my face. But
You look great,
it's
Claire. It's fine. All good.
but yes, I think that's the really key things. The identity change.
Mm.
I don't know I don't have the answers, but
No,
I would
no.
say, but if you notice someone, I'd say a really key thing, going back to your original kind of question, was how do you help someone? If you can notice changes in someone and be there and get them talking and recognize signs. And so the way they used to deal with menopause, they used to just put everyone on antidepressants. And now doctors still are doing that, but there's a movement to stop them doing that and put people on HRT or give
Mm.
them other help to recognise that it's a menopause, it's a hormone symptom, it's not a mental health symptom. As a
Mm.
result of the hormone drop, yes, you can have mental health issues, but
Yeah.
it is not to be assumed, because antidepressants have their own side effects.
It's the misdiagnosis which came through with the research that I did. It's like, particularly if someone's going through it early, and it's not, like you said earlier on, the GPs aren't trained, or there's not a lot of knowledge out there. And if you're lucky enough to have it, perhaps it will get noticed earlier. So the misdiagnosis of someone being depressed and then being put on antidepressants. I mean, I suppose that's more of a risk if it happens younger, but it still happens in that little window as well, which just seems, I don't know, off the mark for now, considering we know more compared to what we did, say, 20 years ago. I say we know more. I don't, but I think in general there's more knowledge out there. I'd like to press a little bit further on the serving bit, because so many people need to hear it, and I suppose this is still that encompasses the whole people pleasing thing. So with when the hormones start to change and the estrogen starts, like, drops, we get this. I'm so we, like it's me. It's not me. You guys get the, like, okay, the identity shift is, right, who am I? How do I fit in? Is that when we start to get the it drops away, right? You're not going to go and please everybody. The upsides of that sound okay from my side. So how how does that actually play out, I suppose, is the question, because you're juggling so much in that moment. Like, so the change is happening. and however you're being affected in terms of going through perimenopause or the menopause itself, that shift towards right, my identity. How do people take control of that? What does it generally lead to? And I say generally because I'm not sure everybody does this, but I suppose I'm quite lucky in that the kind of circles that I've moved around and the people that I talk to are often people like yourselves, Claire, who have either already gone through like, actually, I want to run my own thing and I'm doing this, to those who are in later on in life, say 55 plus, who are like, no, I'm going to start my own business. Like, so or how can we support that even more? How do we make that shift from being servants into, see, we can actually do this for ourselves and we can put these boundaries in place?
Well, when you said what happens, my first reaction was whine. People, because there's because that is what happens.
Is it
There's a real problem that, in menopause people don't know what's happening, and
right?
so they turn to whine.
Really?
And yeah,
Right. So
it's
literally, you're like trying to find a coping mechanism, like
yeah,
dumbing it down, right?
yeah, yeah. So, but although because it's confusing,
Mm,
and just how we've seen a massive rise in female entrepreneurs, coming out of the lack of flexible
mm,
working. It's the same with menopause. I think, like you say, on one hand, the identity is really confusing and difficult, but on the other hand, there is that sense of freedom. There's that sense of, the F word comes up a lot. You'll I've noticed that, in lots and lots of menopause memes or posts, you'll see the F word a lot. Or Facebook groups proudly about the F word for women. And it's because it is almost like the reclaim. It's kind of go, no, it's my life now.
yeah.
So
Oh, I like that.
that in some ways that's quite a good reality check.
Yeah.
Um, when you say we, I think that's quite a good thing, because I don't think there's any bit of it that my partner thinks I'm doing on my own, because he
Mm,
suffers from he suffers from some of the side effects. But he didn't necessarily know me before, so he didn't know me when I was much more. He still says I'm a bit of a people pleaser. He'll say, "Well, why don't you don't have to worry about it so much." So undoing all of that's difficult.
yeah.
But I think in terms of support, I think there are some really great things in terms of, if women are able to find the self-care, some of the mechanisms, if they're able to get support, and the HRT route isn't for everybody, so whatever
Yeah.
support they can get, whatever works for them, then I think the reevaluating life and noticing, I think people start noticing what their talents are. They start noticing what their passions are. I think they are more assertive. I have a people pleasing friend who's kind of about a year behind me in the journey, who's a very senior nurse. And she told me that she just put her hand up to someone who was bringing her a list of to do things the other day and went, no, go away tomorrow. And I've known her since I was 4 in primary school. That would never have happened. Like, it's just like, what? So, these things happen that can make you they can make you a better leader. They can make you, more decisive based on necessity.
Mm,
And where you'll notice the imbalance is where the self-care isn't there.
mm,
But there's also a sense of permission. There's a sense of, all this maturity, all this life, and, all that, all the humility. There are some real bonuses. But I do think a lot of it does come down to conversation. Some people
yeah.
have, it depends where people are on their journey.
Okay. I think I like the word reclaim because that's something which I used a few years ago with some teachers. I was like, look, actually, we can reclaim our lives. Like, because a lot of people were just disenfranchised with what's going on and they're not really passionate about education, but not in the way that it's currently being delivered and the time constraints. I think well, I think the next question would be like the how part, which I suppose brings us right back to the beginning. Like, how can small businesses, corporates, society start to actually, rather than indoctrinate is probably a bit too strong, but I think society is just it's generally there for our girls being brought up and going into young women, that they are almost like servants. I think it's shifting, but I don't think it's going away, if you see what I mean. I've got three young daughters. I've got, well, young, one's 22, one's 20. We often have conversations with the older two about just following a path that they want to follow. But it's really hard. And one has already just gone down, I suppose, maybe because it's just in her nature, gone down the path, and she is in the NHS and she is working and serving and caring. It is her personality. But at the same time, I'm always like, do you want to come do this? Do you want to come and try that? I'm like, come and try this part in my business, because I just think there's more. I think there's a way to balance both. And I want to open up the door, not just to my daughters, but to everybody, and say, actually, it's another way of living your life. You don't have to do it in the way that was prescribed to us by a system that was devised 100 years ago. When I look at what the opportunities are now for everybody, and this is probably going slightly off topic in a sense that it's not just based around the menopause, but around just decisions for yourself and life decisions. So we've moved away from growing up in the small town, small village, or even the city, and saying, right, we're going to work here and we're going to stay here forever. Like, literally, you can go and do whatever you want, wherever you want in the world, because we've got a laptop, we've got a phone. Go and do it whichever way, the way that you like. But I can still see that being unpicked in front of me every day when I see my daughters, who have kind of been out in the work world now for probably 18 months or so. Is there a way which we can support that more? One thing I wrote down very quickly, Claire, was that I know somebody who starts conversations and manages difficult conversations, like that support from other people. If somebody is listening and I like resonating, going, yeah, this is me. I didn't realize it, but this is basically describing what I'm going through right now. How can they go and find support? Where would they find it? Where's the best place to land?
If they think they might be menopausal,
Mm,
perimenopausal, and having symptoms, and they're not quite sure, or if, for example, they want to talk to a partner or a friend or a doctor and they don't think they'll be believed or fully listened to, my best advice is to go on to Louise Newson's. She's one of the leading voices in menopause in the UK. You can find her on Instagram. You can find her on her website really easily. And she has a checklist, a free symptoms checklist. And to go through that, and then you can kind of self-diagnose, but you can say, look, I've got a few of these symptoms, I
mm,
think. Or if someone is, the one thing that I would say, what happened to me being that it was my mood, my confidence, my resilience, what people commonly describe, and this is what Davina McCall said before, is you just don't feel like you. This
mm,
is why it's scary. It's a really scary time. It doesn't happen to everyone, but if that happens, to not feel like yourself and almost feel like everything that you are doing, saying, thinking, feeling, everything your body is doing is feeling like you're having almost an out of body experience. I didn't feel like me at all. I felt terrible at everything. So I felt terrible at my job. I felt terrible with my kids. I felt a terrible mother. Daughter, all my roles are in question. And I'm still coming through that now, but more so
mm,
say I might think I'm a terrible friend and or daughter. So I think if people if people go through the symptoms, definitely speak to someone. Um, Speak to someone that's a woman of a similar age or slightly older than you that is fairly open or that you feel that you can confide in. And the other thing I would say is really start being conscious of your support network, because just like when you start a business, you kind of have to be careful what you say to whom, because there are
mm,
people that are either envious or not entrepreneurial that will talk you out, particularly if you're leaving something like, NHS or the teaching profession or something where you've got a pension and you've got annual leave and you've got what other people see as security and regularity and in inverted commas a profession. Don't take risk. You will work out who will accept you, who can you confide in the most without judgment, and go
mm,
and see them. You have to find, and going back to your other questions, if you can be more of that person as a colleague, as a business support, then you're on a winner,
mm,
because it's just the lack of judgment does all of it.
Okay.
That's the key thing, and that's what's really powerful in it. Because when people sense a lack of judgment, then they'll talk. Because
Mm,
they often don't have the answers. I didn't know what I was going through. I could just tell you that, when my son was back chatting me in the middle of COVID and homeschooling, I wanted to put him through a wall. I literally wanted to pick him up and put him through the whole wall.
mm,
And that was extraordinary, not least that I'm 5'1", he was already 5'6" by this point. But, you know, but it's that weirdness. It's anything. It's and yeah, just directing people to information. Or if you think someone is showing signs of depression, or someone says they think they're depressed, and or if someone says they've got issues in their relationship, sometimes it's subtle signs like they're falling out with the parent, or they have issues in their relationship, or they're suddenly having divorce thoughts, or it doesn't add up. And the problem is everyone's so different. It makes it really difficult to realize necessarily what's going on.
yeah.
But yeah, so if you can be an ear, if you can listen to someone without judgment, I think that's the ultimate winner. But for people to go and find someone that they can confide in, it often takes only one conversation, and just not to feel, because it's stopping that isolation. The most crucifying thing, and I don't think it was just for me, I've heard it from other people, is that it's really isolating. I mean, I'm hoping that's changing, because I'm seeing it change every month
Yeah.
in our awareness.
Is it isolating in the sense that you feel like you're just on your own with it, or and when you went through that originally, just because there wasn't an obvious place to go?
Um, I hadn't got a clue what was happening.
Okay.
And this is what Davina McCall says. She
Yeah.
says it as well. She didn't know what was happening. Now, I think she's like a couple of years before me,
Mm,
maybe in her experience. But and I'm hoping now that people are aware of it. So we have our over 40s health check.
mm,
So I don't think it's part of that yet. But I would hope that the nurses in those sessions start talking to women about. I think there's a campaign actually. There's a campaign now, because it's not part of it, but they're trying to get it built in.
mm,
But if people go for their over 40s health check, bring that up. Nurses hear about menopause, find out in advance. But when you hit kind of like 42, 43, it starts from about 44. 42, 43. Start asking: does my surgery, does my practice, does my medical centre have an an HRT specialist nurse?
mm,
Mine does. She happens to work with Louise Newsom. I'm really lucky. And also, we live 2 towns away from Louise's clinic. So around here we're really lucky.
mm.
But you just find out. I mean, I'm hoping that women are, but also if anybody is being denied any help or being denied any understanding, don't stop at the first hurdle. So, for example, people might think it's an obvious place for me to go to my mum. She's a really experienced nurse. I know far more about it than she does,
Mm.
and she's not a nurse anymore anyway, so she wouldn't be exposed to the information shared by the NHS anymore, other than what she reads in the paper. And so, yeah, I think it's getting clued up beforehand. That's part of it, which I'm hoping is filtering through.
With the way that I suppose all industries are going, well, I hope this is the way all industries are going, with being more open to progression for women in general, the push to look for that equal opportunities, which I know there's still work to be done in all those areas, even within education. When I say that whole 80-20 split of female teachers to leaders, and I know that's pretty much moved in the corporate world. Is that also the opportunity where you do have women leaders, like, and then they are championing it from their leadership positions? Is that like the dream? Is that still going to be, will it put it more on the map,
Uh,
or does it just make it like, no, we become female entrepreneurs because we just go and make it on our own?
I think there are, you take the NHS and teaching, for example, I think there are far too many women in certain professions for, you couldn't have it. Like, we know already teaching and nursing already. We've got too many people leaving.
Yeah, yeah,
We've got brilliant people leaving.
mm,
So I don't think that's an answer. It's a bit
no,
like the childcare issue.
mm,
Most families now have 2 parents working.
mm,
I think you can't have it all. I don't personally believe we can have it all, but I think it's about giving people choice and giving people a chance to be open and having that conversation. I think in response to your question, yeah, you imagine if Davina McCall was told not to mention it. She was told by the studios or whoever it was, she was told not to talk about it. We don't talk about that stuff. And she was really brave. And wow, you know, look at the difference. I wouldn't have even known what I was going through if it hadn't been for her. And I was listening to a podcast in the middle of COVID when I was walking. And that's how I found it and kind of went, oh, wow, that's me. And so, yeah, so female leaders just having it as part of a conversation, because we'll talk about cancer. We'll talk about a female leader will be off having cancer treatment. I know, you know, a head teacher went off, her health, got a new job, then was diagnosed with cancer, had cancer treatment, came into the new job 9 months later and did a fantastic job. We accept that people live with cancer, live beyond having cancer. We'll talk about that really happily. So it is about making it part of a normal conversation. I mean, I don't work in a school, so I don't know the conversations that go on about periods, pregnancy, or whatever. But pregnancy is a good example. We'll talk about morning sickness, and we'll probably even talk about breastfeeding. Yes, it should just become part of the conversation, which I think is happening. But I also think there needs to be somewhere, you know, I'm really glad that you're interested in the conversation. We need to help men to learn about it, because I can't remember his name, but there's a guy that was campaigning in the north that his wife committed suicide, and he's campaigning for more awareness in society about menopause for that exact reason. He said that's ridiculous that should even happen. And so I think it is. I think it's about open conversation and curiosity, and it's not just a woman's issue. It can't, because it affects too many other people around each one of those women.
Yeah, I agree.
And it's a decade and further.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's what sparked the interest having a conversation about like this for me. Because look, even if only 3 people listen to this, it won't, because I know more people will. But let's say only 3 people listen. I know I've learned something here, and in my hopefully like many years of growing a business, that will come in useful. Just knowing that it's just a case of being one, open to the idea of having a conversation, sparking a conversation. Like, it doesn't have to be about like, oh, are you menopausal? Actually, just having a conversation, going, do you know what? Something's different. Are you okay? Something's
Perfect.
Something along those lines, which then will hopefully lead to a bigger conversation in the future that would be supportive. That to me makes so much sense. So, Claire, is there anything that we haven't spoken about that would be like absolutely like imperative to share?
The only thing that's coming to mind is that it just fits into the whole inclusive conversation and diversity. I think it's great that it's there. I think it's just, rather than it being almost something, oh, how do we accommodate this? It's just part of, we treat everybody as an individual and we give them the opportunity to be, you know, vulnerable, strong, progressive, learning, all of those kind of things. And I think we can all play a role in putting our head above the parapet and just sharing more as and when we can. And I hate to say it, but like a lot of things when it comes to gender things, I think if there are more men like you, men that will listen, and because society does still listen to men more than they listen to women. I don't like it, but it is how it is. The more men we have talking about it, wow, you will speed it up exponentially. So thank you. I think it's amazing that you even asked the question.
I just want to say thank you as well, because for me, I know this is part 1 of learning about this, and there's lots and lots of things I need to go on and research and make it a part of my, I suppose, daily vocabulary, particularly as a business grows to having more people. And I don't want it to be an awkward conversation. And I think I can take the awkwardness away just by having more knowledge. If someone comes to me with something, I'm going to be able to respond in an informed way, rather than I'll have to have a look at that later and then get all like edgy about it. So yeah, thank you. And I really appreciate you giving up some time to come talk to me and to my audience, which is largely women. But there are men in there as well. So I will be a champion for this 100%. And I hopefully in the future we'll get to chat more, because I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you. Like any conversation, you can solve an awful lot of things with just a really healthy amount of curiosity. And hopefully, I didn't waffle too much because
Well,
it's such a massive area.
it is. I should also say, like, you manage my haphazard way of going around it because it's so hard to know, like, the right question to say and also which route we need to go down. So my haphazard way of going around a little bit, you were perfect at keeping me on track. So thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Richard. Great to talk to you.